Beautiful phrasing. So I'm here on Grizzly Peak, that's way up in the Berkeley Hills. It's a paradise up here, and I'm looking out at the bay. I don't know if I see the bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge. Can I see that from here?
Over there.
On that side. Oh, well, it's just an enormously gorgeous view. And I'm with Jeanne Bamberger, who's sitting at her prized Steinway piano. Jeanne, is this a Steinway A or B? What size is it?
I think it's a B.
So it's about a 7-foot piano. Beautiful instrument, and I know we heard the opening of your playing. What exactly were you playing?
Beethoven Dance. It's a series of dances, and that's the first one.
I see. Lovely. Now, you are currently adjunct professor at UC Berkeley. And tell us a little bit about your course that you teach there.
Well, it's called Music Cognition, and it's about about the intelligence that people are using when they make sense of the music they listen to. And people always say there's no intelligence involved, you just do it.
Yeah, and I remembered from an interview you gave, actually oral history, that you were talking about intuition, and you said intuition is learned.
So is creativity. Yes, well, you can't have a new idea, and you can't be able to do something without having learned it.
Right.
But there's something called tacit knowledge, which, because you don't know what you know. You don't know that you are using. It's like learning a lot. You don't remember learning how to talk. But the problem is that the way we don't take advantage of all that people know how to do when we're teaching. What we teach is abstracted from what we know how to do.
I see.
And the tension between what we know how to do and what we know how to say is a very critical part of learning.
And you've written how many books now in this direction?
4, I guess.
And the titles of these books are, I have them here, you have The Mind Behind the Musical Ear, which is Harvard University Press.
That was the second one.
And then Developing Musical Intuitions, a project-based introduction to making and understanding music, and Discovering the Musical Mind, a view of creativity as learning. So that's what I see here. Are there any...
What's not there is the art of listening.
Now I want to talk about your early influences, particularly your piano teachers. Can you tell us a little bit about your very first piano teacher, is Margaret Carlson?
Yes, well, she was lived in the neighborhood, and the most important part of that distinguished her from all the other teachers was that on Saturday mornings she invited all of her piano students to come and do Del Crow's stuff, Eurythmics. That, I think, is where I first became aware of or participated in the whole notion of a phrase or a gesture or the movement of music to goals, which, of course, Schnabel picked up on.
So now I just want to frame this, that you were basically born and raised in Minneapolis before you embarked upon other adventures in different places. So the backdrop is Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Symphony under Metropolis.
Yes.
That must have had a great effect on you.
But I was completely alone and isolated from I didn't know any. I was at home practicing, and my mother was a child psychologist, and my father was a pediatric cardiologist, and there I was.
Now I noticed you some of the other teachers. I want to kind of skip over to the one you had probably the longest. Was that Johanna Groudon?
Yeah.
Tell us a little about her. She was a Russian piano teacher, is that right? Married?
Well, yes, but she had studied with Schnabel for
She studied with Schnabel.
quite a while.
Where would that have been?
In Berlin.
Ah. would you say her teaching was, I hate to use this cliche, the Russian school?
No, not at all.
How would you
It was
describe it?
very much in the direction of Schnabel.
Okay, we'll get to Schnabel in a minute. And now, so Johanna Growden was married to a cellist, and she was a collaborator with her husband.
Right, but they came to Minneapolis because he was the principal cellist of the Minneapolis Symphony, and before that he had been the assistant principal cellist of the Berlin Philharmonic.
That is a prestigious orchestra, remains today one of the greatest in the world. One of the what frames this too is your interest in philosophy. You sort of had a companion passion. Really, your main passion was philosophy, wasn't it? Would you say that it overrided music for a good deal of the time until you draped yourself more in musical studies, or the opposite?
When I was at the University of Minnesota, the first 2 years I was a music major, and I didn't like that. I used to say that I wanted to look at the stars. I didn't care what they were called. But I wasn't interested in the form that music theory and analysis took in the very mechanical sort of way.
Would you say it was like a pedantic? Could you use that word?
After 2 years, I went into the philosophy department because Herbert Feigl was, I guess, sort of a friend of my parents. And so I went to study with him, and he was a logical positivist, which was very different from what I was interested in, but we used to argue a lot, and he played the piano somehow or other, so.
So in your studies with Johanna Growden, ultimately she referred you to Artur Schnabel. Now tell me a little bit about how that came to pass and what
Well,
followed.
one time when he was in town, she had me play for him, and he accepted me as a student. But I had been studying with her for probably 3 years or 4 years, and that was a whole new education as far as and with Krennic I was studying 16th century counterpoint.
So now when you were with Krennic, were you then a music major? What part of your life?
I probably had shifted to philosophy by that time, but
I see.
But I was I studied privately with him. The 16th century counterpoint thing was after I had left the music major.
I see. Tell me about the group of students that you were with, and this was again this was New York City. Am I right about that? With Schnabel. You mentioned 86th Street and Central Park West, where every other week that he convened lessons. There were 3-hour lessons.
Yeah.
Tell me who was there beside yourself.
Claude Frank and Leon Fleischer, basically.
And Hilda
Banks, but that was very much in passing.
Right.
And Deacon Newland was also very much in passing.
She
was a very serious musicologist who had studied with Schoenberg at UCLA.
You were talking about the lesson that was about 3 hours long, and it was every other week. Am I right about that?
Right.
And give me an idea of a particular lesson that you mentioned focused on the Mozart
Well,
sonata.
first of all, you need to know that every lesson, it was the student's choice of what they were going to study. And they brought APs that supposedly they knew how to play. And the whole lesson was on that one piece.
Okay.
And there was no technique or no anything else. It was about that piece.
Tell me about then the B-flat sonata, the opening, and what you were demonstrating.
Well, he made a big point of saying that the right hand and the left hand, they don't, the grouping boundaries are different. This one, the left hand goes on after the right one has started the next phrase.
So he did talk about asymmetries.
Not in that language.
Not in that language.
Mostly that was, he would point out a 5-bar phrase in the midst of something, but
I see.
this was not asymmetry. It was just a.
But the entry of the left hand comes not like you would.
Yeah, if you start them together, they come out together.
Right. Interesting. That's very interesting. And how many teachers would focus on something like that? Now, he had a wonderful quote. I'm just going to shuffle my pages that I found very truthful. You don't have to heat the music, it's hot enough. Now, did that come up often when people would play? Would he say to them, you know what? You don't have to heat the music, it's hot enough?
I think he said it once.
I see. Now, tell me some of the things, because I took some quotes from your oral history about when he said that you don't sound like Mozart when you play. A player doesn't sound. He didn't.
I don't remember that.
He didn't talk about style. It wasn't style
No.
that he was focused on. He was focused on.
Certainly not.
Tell me exactly what he was focused on.
The structure of the piece,
Okay.
and particularly interesting moments like that one.
And he never talked about technique. You had mentioned that phrasing and phrase structure.
Well, and also the big design.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit, and this I found interesting. There was a futility of recreating the composer's intention. Everybody talks about that, how we have to know what the composer intended. Who said and who contradicted that statement?
Well, I don't know who said it, but he certainly laughed at it, because how do you know how do you have any idea what the composer's intention was except from the music that he wrote?
I have a question for you. On YouTube, we have snatches of Bartók playing his own music. We have, and it is very kind of hard to hear it, we also have a couple of other people playing their own music, and they're scratchy recordings, and the tempos don't match up with a tempo designation. How does one feel about trying to emulate the way the composer plays his own music versus the individual performer?
Well, that's different from the metronome marking, because the metronome marking didn't necessarily correspond with the composer's performance. And they were very approximate.
The other thing is, and I think I also gleaned this from what Schnabel would say, practicing should be an experiment, not a drill.
Well, the way he said was practicing, yes, practicing should be experiment, not drill, not a experiment.
Can't play this the same as before. You, in other words, each time you play, you're not trying to sort of standardize.
That's very well put in that New York Times article.
Today's Times with the Gould and
The
Schnabel.
reason he didn't want to record is because every performance is different and disappears, and then there's the next one.
And that is so true, because music is an art in time. If you don't put it up on the wall like with art and you perceive it on the wall, it is constantly changing.
Furthermore, the notation is not like that. The notation is discrete and static.
You also said on your oral history that about Schnabel that he felt that historical performance issues are poo-pooed. He said if Bach had a piano, he would have loved it. I love that one.
Yeah, he tried very hard to understand the piece.
Okay. That was the bottom line, was the understanding of the music.
Yes.
So that's very interesting.
And
now
don't forget that he was a composer. Schnabel.
Tell me about his composing.
Well, I only heard, and that is referred to in something I was just reading about Metropolis. Metropolis played or conducted his first symphony. What was I reading? And there's a picture of Schnabel in the hall listening to the rehearsal, and I was next to him, actually. And here you can have something. He said, there was the hall was dark and there was a light so he could follow the score. And he said, "That's a Schnabel light."
That's adorable. He wrote cadenzas to Mozart concertos too. Have you ever played his cadenzas?
No.
And you wrote a cadenza.
I wrote a
Tell us
cadenza.
about that.
Well, this is a supposedly discovered Beethoven, or very early Beethoven concerto, which I played with the Minneapolis Symphony, and I wrote a cadenza to where it was needed.
So did other pianists ever?
No, nobody else played
Okay.
that piece. It was not a great masterpiece.
So now finally in this last segment, I'm interested in the transition from the studies with Schnabel into the progression with Roger's sessions and your focus on different kind of music.
Yeah, well, I knew that I didn't want to become whatever you call it, performing concert pianist. And I think that Schnabel realized that because I was, at the same time that I was studying with him, I was a student at Columbia in philosophy, studying with people like Erwin Edmund. And I think Schnabel realized that I was thinking, I like to think. And so he sent me to sessions. And there, it's true, I started playing contemporary music. Schnabel's music, by the way, was very atonal.
Yeah, it says here that. So Schnabel didn't perform contemporary music, did he?
Not as far as I know.
Okay.
But there are recordings, I think, of him playing his own music. And so it's true, I began playing the music of the young sessions students, the young composers like Leon Fleischer and Earl Kim and Andy Imbrie and all those people who were much more of a group than the piano people were. I never was at Leon Fleischer's house or Claude Frank. We didn't see each other outside of the lessons, but here in Berkeley, the young composers were very much a group, and that was a new experience for me to have people I could talk to. And
So you've had quite a career. It's spanning, I don't know, decades upon decades, starting Minneapolis and then MIT. You were 30 years on the faculty at MIT. And then from there, were you also on the faculty at Harvard?
After I retired from MIT, I taught a course in the School of Education, a couple years.
So would you say right now, what is your passion as it pertains to the cosmos of music and education?
Well, how we make sense of the music all around us and what's the nature of that knowledge and intelligence, and how does it develop?
And that will help everyone, but to a great degree, teachers of music.
I haven't really ever worked with teachers of music. I'm interested in how a piece of music works and how we learn to do that. And then in my music cognition class, I'm talking about, they're working with my software, and that involves them in asking themselves, what do I know how to do when I'm making decisions about these little pieces I'm composing or something. But the students are not music majors. Most of the students they're all over the university. They're in biology and computer science and cognitive science and all kinds. And there are usually not more than 2 music majors in the class.
Well, thank you for this amazing opportunity to speak with you and learn about your cosmos and universal that spans so many different exciting areas and plus has so much historical significance, especially when we talk about the artistry of Artur Schnabel.